Imagine a time when the surgeon's blade was more likely to condemn than to cure. A time when the very air of a hospital reeked of death, and the screams of the living mingled with the silence of the recently departed. In 1880, in the heart of Virginia, such a place existed. A hospital, they called it, but to those who entered, it was a tomb. The year was 1880. The place, a sprawling Gothic edifice nestled amidst the rolling hills of rural Virginia, known simply as St. Jude's Charity Hospital. Its stone facade, once a symbol of hope and healing, had, by this grim year, begun to sag under the weight of its own dark reputation. The windows, like vacant eyes, stared out onto a world that increasingly whispered tales of horror within its walls. The very atmosphere surrounding St. Jude's was thick with a palpable dread, a pervasive fear that clung to the damp, moss-covered stones and seeped into the very earth beneath its foundations. It was a place where shadows stretched long and distorted, even in the brightest daylight, and where the chill of the grave seemed to linger in every draught. Within this decaying monument to suffering, a man of ambition, a surgeon named Elias Doyle, held sway. He was a figure of imposing stature, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that could, at times, betray a flicker of something colder, something calculating. Doyle had arrived at St. Jude's years prior, heralded as a prodigy, a man whose surgical prowess promised to usher in a new era of medical advancement in the struggling institution. His hands, they said, were swift and precise. His mind keen and unburdened by the sentimentalities that often hampered lesser men. He spoke of progress, of pushing the boundaries of what was known, of conquering the ailments that ravaged the human form. Yet, even then, a subtle ruthlessness underscored his pronouncements, a hint of an unyielding will that would stop at nothing to achieve its aims. He was a man driven not merely by a desire to heal, but by an insatiable hunger for recognition, for a legacy that would echo through the annals of medical history. It was this ambition, pure and unbridled, that would ultimately lead him down a path from which there was no return, transforming St. Jude's from a place of last resort into a crucible of unspeakable horrors. In his early years at St. Jude's, Dr. Doyle was indeed a beacon, albeit a stern one. He performed operations with a speed that astonished his peers, a necessity in an age before effective anesthesia. Patients, if they survived the initial shock and the agony of the blade, often succumbed to infection, a silent, invisible killer that stalked every ward. Dr. Doyle, however, was not content with the limitations of his era. He devoured medical texts, corresponded with European physicians, and experimented tirelessly in his private laboratory, a secluded wing of the hospital that few dared to enter without his express permission. He spoke of a new understanding of the body, of procedures that could revolutionize medicine, even as the hospital's mortality rates remained stubbornly high. The turning point, some whispered, came with the fever epidemic of '78. A virulent strain of influenza swept through Virginia, filling St. Jude's to overflowing. The wards became a cacophony of hacking coughs, delirious cries, and the desperate pleas of the dying. Dr. Doyle, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of suffering and the inadequacy of conventional treatments, began to deviate. He started with minor transgressions, administering untested concoctions, performing exploratory surgeries on patients too weak to resist, all in the name of understanding the disease. His rationale, he would argue, was for the greater good, for the knowledge that would save countless lives in the future. But the line between healing and experimentation blurred, then vanished entirely. It was in the dimly lit, perpetually damp basement of St. Jude's that Surgeon Doyle's true darkness began to manifest. Here, far from the prying eyes of the few remaining concerned staff, he established his personal dominion. The air was thick with the cloying scent of formaldehyde and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. It was here that the bodies of the hospital's unclaimed dead, and some whispered, even the recently deceased who had families, found their way to Doyle's dissection table. He justified it as anatomical study, a necessary evil for the advancement of surgical knowledge. But his experiments grew increasingly macabre. He sought to understand the very mechanisms of life and death, not through observation, but through invasive, often grotesque procedures performed on cadavers that still held the warmth of recent life. He believed that by pushing the boundaries of what was permissible, he could unlock secrets that would elevate him above all others.
The faint sounds of his work, the rhythmic scraping of bone, the wet thud of organs, would sometimes carry up through the old ventilation shafts, chilling the blood of anyone who heard them. The hospital, once a place of healing, was slowly but surely becoming a charnel house, a laboratory for a man consumed by his own twisted vision of progress. As Surgeon Doyle's influence grew, so too did the hospital's sinister reputation. St. Jude's, once a place of last resort, became a place of dread. The local populace, once desperate for its services, now spoke of it in hushed tones, warning their kin to avoid its doors at all costs. The few patients who still arrived were often those with nowhere else to go. The truly destitute were those brought in by force, their pleas for release falling on deaf ears. The hospital itself seemed to mirror the moral decay within its walls. The once pristine white paint peeled in long leprous strips, revealing the dark, damp stone beneath. The gaslights, once bright and reassuring, now flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort into grotesque shapes. The pervasive stench of antiseptic, once a sign of cleanliness, now mingled with something far fouler, a metallic tang, a sickly sweetness, and an underlying odor of decay that no amount of scrubbing could erase. The suffering within St. Jude's was not merely physical. It was a profound, soul-crushing agony. The eyes of the patients, once filled with a flicker of hope, now only held a deep, unsettling despair. They lay in their beds, gaunt and hollow-eyed, listening to the muffled screams from distant wards, the clatter of instruments from below, and the unsettling silence that often followed. Nurses, once dedicated and compassionate, became withdrawn, their faces etched with a weariness that went beyond mere exhaustion. They moved through the wards like ghosts, their movements stiff and their gazes averted, as if afraid to meet the eyes of those they could not save, or perhaps those they had inadvertently condemned. Whispers circulated amongst the dwindling staff, tales of patients disappearing in the dead of night, of strange deliveries arriving under the cloak of darkness, and of Dr. Doyle's increasingly erratic behavior. But the true horrors of St. Jude's were not always visible. They were hidden, tucked away in forgotten corners, in the dusty recesses of the hospital's labyrinthian structure. It was said that a former orderly, a man named Thomas, driven to madness by what he had witnessed, had meticulously documented his observations in a series of leather-bound journals secreted away in a loose floorboard in the old linen closet. These journals, if they existed, would paint a chilling picture of Doyle's escalating depravity, detailing not just his experiments on the deceased, but his increasingly audacious procedures on the living. There were also rumors of a hidden room, a forgotten surgical theater deep within the hospital's oldest wing, accessible only through a concealed passage behind a crumbling bookshelf in Doyle's private study, a place where the most unspeakable acts were committed, far from any prying eyes, where the cries of the afflicted were swallowed by thick stone walls and the earth itself. These were the secrets that St. Jude's held, secrets that festered and grew, poisoning the very foundations of the hospital and all who remained within its cursed embrace. The truth, however, could not remain buried forever. Even in the suffocating atmosphere of St. Jude's, there were those whose consciences, though battered and bruised, refused to be silenced. One such soul was Nurse Eleanor Vance, a woman whose initial idealism had been slowly eroded by the daily horrors she witnessed. Her once bright eyes now held a haunted, distant look, and her hands, once steady and comforting, often trembled as she went about her duties. Eleanor had seen too much: the unexplained disappearances of patients, the hushed transfers to Doyle's private wing, and the faint, unsettling sounds that emanated from the basement in the dead of night. She began to keep her own clandestine notes, scribbling observations in a small, leather-bound diary she kept hidden beneath her mattress. Each entry was a testament to her growing terror, a desperate attempt to make sense of the madness unfolding around her. She documented the strange, almost surgical precision of the patient's decline after Doyle's treatments, the peculiar incisions found on bodies prepared for burial, and the chilling indifference in Doyle's eyes as he surveyed his latest work. Another unwitting witness was young Thomas, the orderly who cleaned Doyle's study. Thomas was a simple man, easily overlooked, but his eyes missed little. He noticed the peculiar stains on Doyle's surgical instruments, stains that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. He saw the strange, often grotesque diagrams scattered across Doyle's desk, anatomical sketches that seemed to twist and distort the human form.
One evening, while dusting a forgotten corner of the study, his hand brushed against a loose panel in the wall. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in St. Jude's, compelled him to investigate. Behind it, he found not dust, but a narrow, winding passage leading down into the darkness. A faint, sickly sweet odor wafted up from below, an odor he had come to associate with the hospital's deepest, most unsettling secrets. He descended, his heart pounding in his chest, and what he saw there would forever shatter his innocence. The hidden surgical theater, bathed in the dim glow of a single gas lamp, revealed the full, horrifying extent of Doyle's depravity. It was a scene of unspeakable cruelty, a testament to a mind that had long since abandoned the Hippocratic oath for a twisted pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Surgeon Doyle, once a man of science, had become a man possessed. His ambition had curdled into a grotesque obsession, his pursuit of knowledge transforming into a relentless, unholy quest. He no longer saw his patients as individuals suffering from ailments, but as mere vessels, specimens upon which to test his increasingly radical theories. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, now held a manic gleam, a terrifying detachment from the human suffering he inflicted. He would spend hours in his hidden laboratory, hunched over his work, muttering to himself, convinced he was on the precipice of a medical breakthrough that would immortalize his name. The whispers of a curse, once dismissed as superstitious nonsense, began to take on a chilling reality. Was it the hospital itself, steeped in years of suffering and death, that had twisted Doyle's mind? Or was it the inherent darkness within him, finally unleashed by the unchecked power he wielded? The lines between sanity and madness, between healer and tormentor, had become irrevocably blurred. St. Jude's was no longer merely a hospital.
It was an extension of Doyle's diseased mind, a living, breathing monument to his escalating depravity, devouring not just bodies, but souls. The fragile facade of St. Jude's, and indeed of Surgeon Doyle's carefully constructed world, was destined to shatter. The catalyst came not from a grand investigation, but from a desperate act of defiance. Nurse Eleanor Vance, her spirit finally broken by the relentless horrors, could no longer witness in silence. One stormy night, as the wind howled like a banshee through the decaying corridors and rain lashed against the grimy windows, she made her move. With trembling hands, she retrieved her hidden diary, its pages filled with the damning evidence of Doyle's atrocities. Her plan was simple yet fraught with peril: to expose the truth to the outside world, to the authorities who, until now, had turned a blind eye to the whispers emanating from St. Jude's. But fate, or perhaps the malevolent spirit of St. Jude's itself, intervened. As Eleanor crept through the darkened halls, a sudden, unexpected encounter with a delirious patient led to a struggle. Her diary, her only hope, slipped from her grasp and skittered across the polished floor, coming to rest at the feet of none other than Surgeon Doyle himself, who had emerged from his subterranean lair, drawn by the commotion. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, blazed with a terrifying fury as he recognized the small, leather-bound book. The truth, long suppressed, was now laid bare before him. There was no escape, no more shadows to hide in. The moment of reckoning had arrived. What transpired next is shrouded in conflicting accounts, distorted by fear and the passage of time. Some say Doyle, in a fit of mad rage, set fire to the hospital himself, determined to destroy all evidence of his monstrous experiments, to bury his secrets beneath a pyre of flame and ash. Others claim it was the patients, driven to a collective frenzy by years of torment, who rose up in a desperate, fiery rebellion. Regardless of the spark, the old, dry timbers of St. Jude's ignited with terrifying speed. Flames, like hungry tongues, licked at the peeling paint and consumed the ancient tapestries, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that mimicked the horrors that had unfolded within. The screams that now echoed through the burning edifice were not just of pain, but of a terrifying, cathartic release. The hospital that had devoured its own was now devouring itself. When the dawn finally broke, casting a pale, sickly light over the Virginia hills, all that remained of St. Jude's Charity Hospital was a smoldering ruin, a skeletal husk against the bruised sky. The fire had consumed everything, leaving behind only charred timbers and the lingering stench of smoke and something undefinable, something that spoke of unspeakable suffering. Surgeon Doyle was never found. His fate remains a mystery, lost to the flames and the dark legends that now clung to the very ground where St. Jude's once stood.
Others believe he escaped, a boast in the annals of medical history, his dark legacy continuing to inspire fear and cautionary tales. The hospital, once a symbol of healing, became a monument to human depravity, a stark reminder of what happens when ambition eclipses ethics and the pursuit of knowledge descends into madness. The story of Surgeon Doyle and St. Jude's Charity Hospital serves as a chilling testament not just to the dark corners of medical history, but to the enduring capacity for darkness within the human heart. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How far is too far in the pursuit of knowledge?
At what point does ambition become a destructive force, consuming not only the individual but all those around them? And what responsibility do we bear when we turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, allowing unchecked power to fester in the shadows? The echoes of St. Jude's still linger, a cautionary tale whispered through the generations. It reminds us that true progress is not merely about scientific advancement, but about the unwavering commitment to ethics, compassion, and the sanctity of human life. For when these principles are abandoned, even the noblest of intentions can pave the way to unimaginable horrors. What state are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. And what's your theory on the true nature of the curse that befell St. Jude's? Was it the malevolent spirit of the hospital itself, or simply the chilling manifestation of one man's descent into madness? Share your thoughts. If you found this journey into the shadows of medical history compelling, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more untold tales from the dark archives. Until next time, remember, some mysteries are best left buried, but some truths, no matter how unsettling, demand to be unearthed.